Hello everyone, my name is Madeline Rhyme, and for my project I did a book review on a book called Body Image, Understanding Body Dissatisfaction in Men, Women, and Children by Sarah Grogan. First I'm going to give a little bit of background information on body image. Grogan defines body image as a person's perceptions, thoughts, and feelings about his or her body. A positive body image is when someone feels comfortable in their own body or they are satisfied with their own body. On the other hand, a negative body image is when someone feels uncomfortable with their own body and they are unsatisfied with their body. This is where many of the issues presented in this book come into play because body dissatisfaction, which is when a person has a negative body image, can have many negative effects on men, women, and children. At this point, I'm going to go through each chapter in the book and talk about some of the things Grogan discusses in each chapter, and then I'm going to offer my personal opinion and critique each chapter. Chapter 1 is called Culture and Body Image. This chapter is focused on the current Western view of body size. In Western culture, there is an extreme preference towards slimness. Slimness is associated with happiness, youth, and success, while obesity is associated with lack of control, unhappiness, and laziness. Grogan presents two arguments for the reasoning behind Western culture's view of overweight people. The first is the biological argument, which argues that it is natural for people to view those who are obese negatively because there are many negative health effects that a person can have as a result of being overweight. The cultural argument states that society, not biology, is the reasoning behind the preference towards slimness. Being slim did not become popular until the 1920s, when the flapper became a fashion icon that every woman aspired to follow. The flapper was extremely thin, had no chest, and almost resembled a boy's figure. At the same time, the fashion industry moved towards photographing models featured as flappers and placing their pictures in magazines. A large amount of women read these magazines and became exposed to these images of extremely thin women. In this chapter, Grogan also discusses the history of the portrayal of the male body. The Greeks idolized the naked male body and it was sculpted countless times. Then, in the mid-19th century, the female nude body suddenly became the focus. It wasn't until the 1980s when the male nude body again became popular, which has continued today. We've all seen the magazines that feature males such as this one. It is that common today. Because of this exposure, men have felt the pressure to be thinner and more muscular, just like the men featured in today's media. Now I'll share my personal views of this chapter. I thought that more general information could have been provided about body image in this chapter. While Grogan did offer a definition of body image in her introduction, I think that she should have provided more background information in her first chapter, or maybe even added it to her introduction. There was also a portion of this chapter that discussed tattoos and skin piercings as body alterations, which did not seem to belong in this chapter or even in this book at all. The second chapter is called Women and Body Image. This chapter is all about the issues associated with female body dissatisfaction in Western society. Grogan talks about the different techniques that can be used to determine how women feel about their bodies. One technique is to show a figural scale such as this one to women and ask them to rate what they believe their current figure to be, what they believe men would find the most attractive, and what they would want to look like. Many studies that use similar techniques have found that women actually want to be thin, not because they want to be attractive to men, but simply for a self-desire to be thin. Another thing that Grogan focuses on in this chapter are the different behaviors that women partake in when they feel unsatisfied with their bodies. I'm going to talk about two of them, dieting and cosmetic surgery. Many women who feel as if they are overweight tend to diet. It is estimated that 95% of British and American women have gone on some kind of diet at some point in their lives, even though that dieting can actually be associated with negative health effects. Another behavior that women may carry out if they are experiencing body dissatisfaction is cosmetic surgery. The 2000s have seen a dramatic increase in the number of women deciding to have cosmetic surgery, as well as, not surprisingly, the number of advertisements that promote some form of cosmetic surgery. As a result, women opting to go under the knife has become a normality. My opinions of this chapter are mostly positive. I thought Grogan presented the issues of body image and women in a way that brings the necessary alarm and attention. Grogan also discussed bodybuilding and steroid abuse in this chapter, which I did not go into detail about, but I thought that it was interesting that Grogan did include these topics because they are not usually associated with women. However, it's something that needs to be talked about. My only complaint with this chapter is that I think Grogan should have gone into more detail about cosmetic surgery because of how big of an issue it is. Chapter 3 is titled Men and Body Image. Similar to Chapter 2, Grogan discusses the issues associated with male body dissatisfaction. Also similar to Chapter 2, Grogan talks about the different techniques that can be used to determine how men feel about their bodies. The same technique involving figural scales, such as this one, can also be used for men. The difference is that many of them are focused on muscularity rather than body fat. Studies using similar techniques have shown that men desire to be more muscular than they are, and that they believe that women prefer men who are more muscular. Again, similar to Chapter 2, Grogan discusses behaviors men partake in when they feel unsatisfied with their bodies, and I'm going to focus on two of them, bodybuilding and steroids. The amount of men participating in bodybuilding has increased worldwide. Interestingly enough, many bodybuilders admit that seeing other men who are bigger than them make them feel inadequate and that they need to work harder to get just as big as them. Steroid abuse is also something that sometimes goes hand in hand with bodybuilding. Many men who use steroids are convinced that in moderation, steroids are harmful and that they are necessary to compete with others, when in reality, steroids are in fact very harmful to the body. I personally was very satisfied with this chapter. I thought that Grogan's discussions on men and body image was excellent. My one complaint is that I think Grogan should have gone into detail about the exact negative health effects of steroids instead of just stating that steroids have negative health effects. Chapter 4 is titled Media Effects, and in this chapter, Grogan discusses how the media can negatively affect the body images of men, women, and children. Today, the media, which includes television, movies, magazines, and social networks, features beautiful men and women. Women are often sexualized and portrayed as extremely thin while having large breasts, such as these magazines. Men are portrayed as thin, but with an appropriate amount of muscularity. The difference is that women experience more pressure from the media to conform to a certain body type than men. This chapter also revealed that many men and women are aware of the false portrayals that they are constantly exposed to, and they are also angered by these portrayals, yet both men and women still conform and work to look like the false images shown in the media. While Grogan successfully discussed the connections between the media and the growing increase in body dissatisfaction among men and women, I felt that some of the information she included was unnecessary. Grogan talks about research that was done to study the effects of media on women. It turns out that the research that was done can't even be used to make an acceptable conclusion because the research was done in a lab, and many people will not act the same in the lab as they do in their everyday environment. So the study is actually very useless for Grogan's books, and I don't think that she should have included it. Chapter 5 is called Age, Social Class, Ethnicity, and Sexuality. In this chapter, Grogan discusses how body dissatisfaction among men and women changes when considering age, social class, ethnicity, and sexuality. When looking at age, it was found that boys and girls, adolescent boys and girls, and adult men and women have all shown that they are unsatisfied with their bodies on some level. So, body dissatisfaction does not change with age because body dissatisfaction is found in all stages of life. When looking at social class, studies have shown inconclusive results, and it is not known if body dissatisfaction really does change with social class. When taking ethnicity into account, it was found that Caucasians are most concerned with body image, so a white female is more likely to be unsatisfied with her body than an Asian woman. When looking at sexuality, it was found that there is no difference in body dissatisfaction between heterosexual and homosexual women. However, it was found that homosexual men are more likely to be unsatisfied with their bodies than heterosexual men. I have absolutely no complaints with this chapter. Grogan discussed how body satisfaction changes when it comes to age, social class, ethnicity, and sexuality. Chapter 6 is titled Promoting Positive Body Image. Grogan offers many different techniques to increase body satisfaction, but I'm only going to address two of them. The first is cognitive behavioral therapy, which involves sitting down and talking with a counselor, similar to a normal counseling session. However, CBT involves changing negative patterns of thought. The second technique is simple but effective: exercise. Exercise not only has obvious health benefits, but there is a large amount of evidence that proves that exercise decreases body dissatisfaction and increases body satisfaction. I'm very glad that Grogan included this chapter in her book, because what is the point in discussing this issue if people do not attempt to come up with solutions? I thought she offered many useful suggestions for improving body satisfaction. I only wish that she had included more suggestions that are specific to men, because many of her suggestions were only useful for women, and as we've already discussed, body dissatisfaction is an issue for men as well as women. Also, many of the suggestions Grogan included were geared towards individuals, rather than for society as a whole. I think that the best way to solve this issue is to tackle it on a larger scale, rather than just on an individual level. I've discussed my opinion about each chapter individually, but I wanted to discuss the book as a whole. Grogan tends to include information or studies that were completely unnecessary to include, because they didn't add anything to her point. The best example is in Chapter 4. Grogan talks about a study conducted by Philip Myers and Frank Biocha. The entire study wound up being useless for Grogan's book because they had neglected to collect certain data that was necessary to make a conclusion. Grogan was also very repetitive throughout her book. For each section in her chapters, she included different studies that backed up her statements, which is acceptable. However, many of the studies she referenced all came to the same conclusions. I understand that she was providing this information to support her claims, but I thought she went a little overboard. Other than that, I think that Body Image was a well-written book that I found very interesting. One of the best things that Grogan did with her book was she didn't use too much jargon associated with the sociological and psychological field. This way, anyone who isn't a specialist in that field, such as myself, can read this book without any issues. That is the main reason I enjoyed this book so much. I don't have any kind of sociological or psychological background, but Grogan wrote Body Image in a way that was easy for me to understand and to follow along. I also thought she focused well on many of the different important areas associated with body image. And finally, I would definitely recommend this book to anyone interested in the topic of body dissatisfaction, even if you are not an expert in sociology or psychology.